Let's see what critical scholarship says about Jesus being a false prophet who falsely predicted the end. Let's check out what this, apparently the new Dan McClellan has to say.
Just look at Mark 13:30, where Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away before these things have happened. Heaven and earth shall pass away." Here, it's helpful to cite the work of biblical scholar R.T. France on this passage. As he says, if it were not for the embarrassment that this passage causes because Jesus got it so wrong, the verse would offer no problems for interpretation. The language is clear and definite, and the statement is emphatic and authoritative. In other words, again to quote French, the obvious sense of this passage is that Jesus is teaching that the generation of people that he's talking to will not pass away before the kingdom of God has come. There is nothing in the text, in the Greek, that would make someone think that Jesus is not predicting this. The only reason that someone would contest this interpretation is because Jesus was wrong, and later Christians don't like that. And so they will manufacture some reason to say that's not what it said.
Ooh, this scholar is very emphatic with regards to Jesus being a false prophet, and that there is no alternative with regards to how we're supposed to analyze this scripture where Jesus falsely predicted the end, and Christians just manufacture reasons. Well, let's take a look at the critical scholarship. This fella here is clearly not as well versed in the critical scholarship with regards to the Olivet Discourse that he is presenting, because there is a variety of ways we can tackle this, that he seems to be absent-minded about it. It's not that Christians are entirely dogmatic. Yes, it's a difficult issue to discuss, because if Jesus is the omniscient, eternally begotten Son, he shouldn't have got that wrong with regards to the end. So let's quickly look at this. We'll look at some critical scholarship. I can provide a critical scholar, someone that's very well regarded, Joel Marcus, in his commentary on Mark, which I recommend that you read and get. It's a great book. But let's quickly look at Mark 13 here. This scholar clearly left out a little bit of detail that's probably relevant. With regards to the opening of Mark 13, the temple is prophesied to be destroyed, not one stone upon another, okay, being thrown down. And then after he says this, Jesus, the disciples come to him and ask a question. But this is where Christians sometimes miss out on this. There's actually two questions being asked. It says, tell us when these things will be with regards to the temple being destroyed, and what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished. And this is what critical scholarship takes as the second coming with regards to the parousia. Jesus is coming back. Okay, and if you look at Matthew 24, his version of the Olivet Discourse, you can see that, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of the coming of the end of the age? So you can see there's two questions here being asked. And here's the difficult thing. I guess on both sides of the argument here. In one capacity, Jesus is amazingly prophetic that within a generation, within 40 years, a significant, impactful number within Hebraic numerology as well as theology, 40 years, within 40 years, the temple was destroyed by the Romans. And the critical scholarship actually dates this prophecy at least before 70 AD with the emission of the fire that Josephus writes that destroyed the temple. If this was a prophecy written after that, it would have been included in this. So we know that this was actually written prior to 70 AD, maybe 1 or 2 years prior from a critical standpoint. And when we look at the historical fulfillment, in terms of the signs of the end that is coming, the wars and rumors of wars during the Pax Romana, the earthquakes in Laodicea, the famines under Claudius, which Luke mentions in Acts. There's all these amazing historical fulfillment leading up to the destruction of the temple. And then, and you see it goes all the way through verse 8, verse 14, and then we'll come to, say, verse 24. This is where it seemingly is a transition to the second coming. And I'll tell you why. Because it talks about, but in those days after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the star will be falling from heaven. This is judgment language from Isaiah. Okay? And if you look at the rabbinic commentator Rashi, which actually Joel Marcus mentions, which I'll include just here, it talks about that this is also can be God judging the demonic powers, principalities and powers, heavenly creatures, or being judged upon as well. So this language still is judgment of Jerusalem, but we see the transition to the parousia when it says in verse 28, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Okay? This is the second coming moment. Now, with regards to the false prediction, if this here is about the Parousia, when it looks like it is, about the second coming of Christ, then Jesus didn't come back within that generation, and Jesus is a false prophet. So obviously this poses a difficulty for Christians who dogmatically can't obviously tolerate that idea. And early church fathers have commented on this. But this scholar here saying there's no way to negotiate your way out of it. There's no data that presents an alternative solution to this, and that it's pure mere dogmatism of Christians manufacture reasons. Well, let's look at what, say, Joel Marcus says. R.T. Francis is a respected scholar, by all means. So is Joel Marcus. He's very well respected in this field. And let's see, with regards to they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds, which is clearly invoking Daniel 7 imagery, which is an ascension event, going to the heavens. But the way that Mark is using it, where he changes coming on the clouds to in the clouds, it looks like a descension event, okay, that is coming down, okay, which further enhances the idea of the Parousia. But who's the they will see? Whose they will see? Now, this is what Joel Marcus says. Let's take a quick look. I'm going to scan through this, but it says they will see, opsentai. This verse echoes Daniel 7:13-14, but only the one who sees in Daniel 7 is the seer himself. But who sees it in Mark? Most scholars take opsentai as an impersonal plural equivalent to the people will see, or the Son of Man will be seen. This sort of impersonal construction is attested elsewhere in Mark, including chapter 13. But this sort of exegetical option should be exercised only if a personal reference is nonsensical. Is this the case here? Both the elect and the false Christs and prophets were mentioned a few verses back, and the elect will immediately be mentioned in 13:27. Of the two groups, however, the false Christs and prophets seem to be the more likely candidate, since the Markan passage, most similar to ours, ascribes eschatological scene to Jesus' enemies, the high priest and his associates in 1462. This might suggest that the gospel's opponents, such as the false Christ and prophets, are the seers. So this unlocks, this is the critical data. Opsentai, they will see, it seems, the enemies of Christ. And if you remember in Mark 14:62, where he says to Caiaphas, you will see the Son of Man sit at the right hand of power coming on the clouds of heaven. When you see that, this is directly towards the enemies of Jesus. So if it's the enemies of Jesus that are going to see the Son of Man coming back, this doesn't necessarily give it a worldwide eschatological perspective of the second coming. And that's the critical data. You've got to take that into consideration. Because when you invoke the judgment language of Isaiah just prior to it, and we know the temple is leading up to it, maybe the Parousia needs to be reinterpreted. Yes, the first century expectation of Christians thought that Jesus was coming back with a generation, and then you can see the evolution of their ideas in 2 Peter and even in Paul, that maybe it's not going to be what we thought it was. You can see their eschatological views evolve, okay? And addressing direct questions, why hasn't Jesus come back yet? And so 1,000 years is one day is 1,000 years. So maybe, possibly, their view of the Parousia and what was written wasn't, maybe it was about Jerusalem, maybe it was about the end, but it leaves it open. The data, the critical data, does present the idea that it's the enemies of Christ. Now, here's the interesting part. In Josephus, we do see the idea on the beginning of the Roman-Jewish War that these supernatural events, which he says it's like a fable, that there was these chariots in the heavens coming out of the sky. Now, critical scholarship might want to say, and they do say, that this is the theological emphasis by, and Josephus has taken liberties with the idea that Jerusalem was destroyed by divine decree. But nonetheless, you can't pick Josephus when you want to and discard him when you want to. That's being dogmatic. He reports eyewitnesses in the beginning of the war that heavenly chariots came out of the sky. And we can see that the critical data shows that it's the enemies of Christ that will see him. Now, if we go to Matthew 24, this is when it gets really interesting. That if we go to Matthew 24, we see that this same line of passaging occurs, and it's like those that, when the Son of Man comes, the ones that see him will mourn. Why would the believers mourn? The enemies will mourn. And if this is truly in judgment of Jerusalem, the enemies of Christ will see the coming of the Son of Man, then the idea is that Jesus was coming back. This first part was that, which sort of parallels the ideas of partial preterism, that he came back in judgment of Jerusalem. And this is where Matthew expands, because shortly after this prophecy, we see two parables of the kingdom of heaven. See, Matthew expands upon where Mark is. Two parables of what the kingdom of heaven will be like. And then there's another coming of Jesus, the Parousia, when he comes with his angels and judges the world. Matches up with Revelation, that's in Matthew 25. You see, it's not as simple as what this scholar is presenting. There is data that suggests maybe we need to have a look at how they interpret the Parousia. The data shows that it's the enemies that will see Christ. Christ himself says that to Caiaphas. And what does that look like? It looks like judgment. That's what we see throughout the historical record. And Jesus says in that parable in Matthew 25 that, in the parable of the talents, that he'll go away for a long time and then he'll come back. And when he does come back, it's judgment. So, look, it's not as simple as what this scholar is presenting. The data is far more interesting and far more exhilarating than one could possibly imagine. And yes, it's tough to wrestle with the text and what we believe to be true versus what the data is showing us. But it's not as simple as what Leviticus here is talking about. So, look, have a read of it. Grab the commentary. These are tough things to discuss and to go through as Christians, but we should never have to be dogmatic. And I don't think the idea of attributing Jesus as that he falsely predicted his own second coming, that might not be as concrete under critical scholarship the way this guy is presenting. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it, and talk to you soon. God bless.